I was reading William Blake the other day, the poet, and he has this great line. He says, we're here to learn how to bear the beams of love. And I thought to myself, as I'm now in the last quarter of my life, I'm like, if I could reach the end of my life and say that I learned how to love, and even more importantly, how to be loved, then I will have lived a good life.
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. This is a fantastic conversation that we have today with Ian Morgan Cron. We talk about his new book, The Fix, and the transformative power of the 12-step program. Ian makes the case that the 12 steps offer a path of healing and recovery, not just for addicts, but for anyone struggling with the universal human condition of feeling not at home in this world. The key, as Ian explains it, is starting with the crucial admission of powerlessness, that we can't fix ourselves through willpower alone. And that opens the door to surrendering to a higher power and allowing God to do for us what we can't do for ourselves. Ian gets incredibly personal, sharing his own journey of addiction and recovery, and how practices like centering prayer have helped him develop the capacity to truly bear and receive love. Ian argues the 12 steps can address the root spiritual issues underlying all kinds of compulsive behaviors and addictions. It's not just drugs and alcohol. He makes a compelling case that this path of transformation is available to everyone, whether you identify as an addict or not. The 12 steps offer a program for living that can lead to deep healing and freedom. This was a rich, nuanced, and grace-filled conversation that I think will really resonate with a lot of people struggling with that sense of not being at home in themselves or the world. Ian brings such vulnerability and wisdom to these timeless questions of how we find our way back to wholeness. It's the kind of conversation that stays with you. So join us as we find our way back home. Here's my conversation with Ian Morgan Cron. Ian, welcome to Shifting Culture. So excited to have you on. Thanks for joining me.
Joshua, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, you start your book out and talking about the feeling of not being at home, that there is an ache within all of us to go back home. Can you give me some examples of how you've tried to get yourself home by doing things that didn't work?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. Yeah, I think at our baseline, all human beings have a kind of existential dis-ease that's with them all the time. And, it can come to you when you're stuck in traffic and something in your little brain says, it shouldn't be this way, right? And or it could be something far more dramatic than that, right? But this is how it is, right? We live in an in-between kind of world between, I think because we have a little bit of heaven in all of us, if you will, the sense of home, what it should be like. We're all just feeling a little bit uncomfortable in our own skins. Now, typically what people do when they feel that way is they go eventually in search of quick fixes, quick solutions to the problem that eventually cause us more problems than they solve. And that's why the book is about essentially examining the addictive nature of all human beings. So for me, I'm a recovering alcoholic and drug addict, and I know about what happens when you go looking for quick fixes to the feelings of existential dis-ease in your body and in your heart and your mind, your spirit. And I just think everybody is on that continuum, and everybody needs a program for living that will help them address that fundamental sense of not at homeness that they live with every day.
As you said, as a recovering alcoholic, drug addict, something that you've said, hey, this is the quick fix for me, working the 12 steps. And I think that programs like that, the 12-step programs, one of the things that have always been attractive to me is I find that is a place where real community happens. Sometimes the church tries to be that community, but 12-step programs are actually the place where people are open and vulnerable and they're there for each other. And I I find it very attractive because I see that it's worked in the past. Why did you write the fix to a general population of people saying, hey, maybe all of us are addicted and this can actually help every human?
Yeah, I mean, you actually just said it perfectly, right? I do believe that all human beings exist on the addiction continuum somewhere. We all have pathological, compulsive relationships with a person, a behavior, or a substance that has mood altering effects and negative consequences. That's just the truth for all of us. Now, that could be people pleasing, overworking, overeating, pornography, alcohol, drugs, smoking. And usually, by the way, we don't just have one addiction. I like to laugh. I tell my wife all the time, I can't get out of bed in the morning and not stub my toe on one of my many addictions, you know? Granted, some of them are more lethal and socially obvious than others, but they all have negative spiritual consequences, right? And sometimes relational consequences, on and on and on, right? And I wanted to help people find the 12 steps that have saved the lives of tens of millions of people, transformed their lives inside and out so that they would be able to derive the same benefits from them, right? To learn how to live in a broken world in a more healthy, life-giving way.
So if the world is broken and we want to move towards the place of healthy and we want to move towards life giving, what is a first step to recognize that we need to start to get on this journey that you laid out in the book?
Yeah, well, so let me just sort of break down what the 12 steps actually say, okay? And this will be slightly reductive, but helpful. So, steps 1 to 3, we admitted we were powerless over blank. In my case, that's alcohol and drugs and other things, right? People pleasing is a big one for me. I could go on and on. That our lives had become unmanageable. So, it really just begins with honesty. It begins with saying, I cannot fix myself. I remember years ago, my first sponsor in my 12-step program said to me, we are well past any conversation about you fixing you. Because I had tried everything, right? To stop drinking, to stop drugs, to stop people pleasing, to stop, eating in unhealthy ways. I could go on, right? And you just have to reach this point where you look at yourself in the mirror and actually it could be a very desperate moment. You say to yourself, I'm out of ammo, man. Like I do not have what it takes to overcome these self-defeating addictive patterns in my life, right? And then we go to step 2. We come to believe that there's a power out there that could restore us to sanity. And then the third step made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. So those first 3 steps, man, they're just really all about mending your relationship with God. No longer am I going to try to be the creator of the universe that's directing the play, starring in the play, producing the play, writing the play. I give up, right? Then 4 through 7 are all about mending your relationship with yourself, right? It's about taking a look inward, uncovering, discovering, and discarding all the emotional and mental rubbish that we find in there. And then, very importantly, turning those things over to the care of God, asking Him, her, it, whatever your preference is, in this journey, to remove those shortcomings, because I think so many people get caught in this trap of trying to be a good person. And really, as a person who self-identifies as a Christian, I'm always like, man, if you're trying to be a good Christian, you have missed the point. like like I understand the sentiment, I appreciate it, but it's actually just wrong, because when you try to fix yourself, that's called reformation, right? And I think that's in opposition to grace, right? What we really want is transformation, and that means giving God consent to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And it sounds passive, but it's hard work.
Okay. Can you just say that again? So giving God consent to do for us what we
What
cannot
we
do for
cannot do
ourselves.
for ourselves. So, I had to reach a point in my life with alcohol and drugs where it's like, I can't fix this. I'm a mess. I need help. I give up. I surrender. I'm done. Then I do the next part of the journey, which is taking a deep inward gaze at what's happening inside my life. And then what I discover, I simply ask God to remove the defects of character that are underwriting my addictions, right? Or my addictive patterns or my uh, dysfunctional behavior. Then when you get to 8 and 9, then you're going to start mending your relationship with other people because there's usually been some adverse consequences in your relationships as a result of your pathological relationship with a person, a behavior, or a substance. And then 10 through 12 is just about cultivating a lifestyle that supports health in each of those domains going forward in your life. You know, my sponsor said something to me the other day that kind of blew my mind because he says mystical stuff all the time that just kind of like, I'm like, what did you just say? Like, I went to seminary twice and that was brilliant, you know? And he said, you know, Ian, once you've been doing the 12 steps long enough, just working them in your life, one day you realize the numbers just fall away and you're living inside of this program for living that is operating on its own. And you're just drawing from the wisdom of the steps every day in no particular order as required, you know? So I love that this is a program for living that, and again, it's evidence-based. It's been proven again and again to transform lives. And that is the truth for people who self-identify as alcoholics or addicts or people who don't. It works for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. As I'm reading your book, I'm like, I'm an addict. And I have some things. I mean, I don't have a problem with alcohol or drugs, but I have addictions. And I'm like, oh, and then I can start to identify. I was like, I'm an overeater, compulsive overeater. Like I need to deal with it. I have to figure that out. And I know that I've been trying with my own willpower to stop doing that. And
Mm-hmm.
as I'm reading your book, I'm like, I can't do that anymore. I can't
Yeah.
just say it's about me and I'm trying to control it myself. I
Yeah.
actually have to go to that first step. I'm powerless over this addiction.
Yes. And you know what, man? I told you this is my first interview about this book, right? We're just launching this podcast tour for the new book. And the fact that you just said that to me makes my heart sing. I'm not happy that you're having that experience. I know that's painful. It's difficult. It's all that stuff. But if that's where the book has brought you so far as you've read into it, then it's achieving its aim. And if you just keep forward on the journey, you will discover more and more what the solution is or what the real fix is. Because overeating is an attempt to deal with pain. Now, obviously, it has other components, as physiological components, neurological components, et cetera. I don't want to be so simplistic that it doesn't take into account all those other things. But fundamentally, addictions are spiritual problems. It's not principally neurological or physiological. It's a spiritual problem. It's us trying to find a solution to internal pain by using external things, which, by the way, is like going to the hardware store to buy bread. It never works.
It's not working. Okay. So this first step is we say, okay, I am powerless. At the beginning, it can sound a little bit self-defeating. Like I don't have any agency in it. There's nothing I can do, which is probably a great place to get to. But what does powerlessness do for us in the journey? And why is that really one of the most crucial things that we have to get to?
Thank you. I mean, listen, this is really a supremely Christian idea, right? That we are powerless. Now, yes, we have some agency in our lives. I had the agency to get up this morning, put on a shirt, make breakfast, be on this call. I mean, so we operate with some agency. But listen, believing that you have control and power over your life ultimately is kind of ridiculous when you think about it. I mean, half of us can't sneeze without peeing our own pants. It's like what, you know what I'm saying? Like we are powerless in the face of the vicissitudes of life, the difficulties of life, the pain inside. It's just a fact. And the sooner we make peace with that fact, the sooner we'll get on the road toward living more serene and productive lives. I I would also say this. Here's the big surprise. When you finally reach the point of powerlessness and surrender, you often, if not most of the time, there, and I've heard this a million times with people, and I've experienced it, you suddenly feel this new kind of power come into your life that brings hope and light, and but it's no longer a life built on willpower or on self-reliance, but on a new kind of spirit or God reliance, right? And then you discover, oh, there's the power I've been looking for all along. But you have to get to the end of your own rope before it really sets in.
Can you contrast that a little bit within your own story of how you tried to control and have power over what you were doing or having your little quick fixes, and then what surrender has done in your life?
Yes. So I first got sober from alcohol in 1987. And in the book, I revealed that I had a relapse in 2020. I went to treatment but this time for prescription medication, specifically for Adderall and Xanax, and which I was taking, for people who have addictive personalities, any mood altering substance can be turned into an obsession and something that you take like Tic Tacs, you know what I mean? Which was a very humbling experience, a very painful experience, but not one I actually really regret a lot anymore because of what has happened in my life as a result through my work with the 12 steps and in community. I can remember a time when I was in a hotel room in California and Los Angeles, and I was trying to wean myself off of Xanax, but I didn't know what I was doing, and I ended up having a seizure in a hotel room. And at that moment, I remember laying in bed, I was sweating, I was a mess, and I was like, I'm done. I cannot fix this problem on my own. And I have to tell you that in that moment, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but at the moment at which I said, help, the most powerful prayer ever, help, right? I felt my chest dilate and this kind of overwhelming feeling of presence, this feeling that a new kind of power was flowing into me and a peace came over me that it's almost as if I heard God say to me, okay, now I got you. Love has you. And now there's hope. And man, that's the big. So in other words, as a friend of mine in my program likes to say, powerlessness is a superpower. That's the paradox.
Hey friends, it's Joshua here, and I just want to take a quick moment to tell you about Shifting Culture Productions. If you've got a podcast, you're thinking about starting one, or you're dreaming up another creative venture, we're here to help bring your vision to life. From production and coaching to strategy and supports, we'll work alongside you to get your project off the ground and thriving. Let's partner together to create something impactful. To schedule a call and learn more about pricing, just email me at jjohnson@allnations.us. I'd love to hear about your ideas and see how we can make them happen. Let's create something amazing together. Reach out today. You were able to actually sense then the presence of the divine, the presence of God, the presence of love
Yes.
when you said, I'm done, help. I need something outside of myself. I know that, hey, you hit rock bottom, you could get to that spot. And I think for anybody dealing with addictions or with things that they're trying to numb themselves from the pain that's really underneath what's going on, the spiritual pain, is it possible to surrender and to say, come feel me help before I hit rock bottom?
Um, yes. Yes, you can. And we like to say in my program, we like to say it's getting off the elevator at a higher floor. You know what I mean? You don't have to get to floor. You don't have to hit bottom, to get to floor one. Now, I will say that there's a gift in desperation, right? Because at that point, you're willing to do anything to achieve physical and emotional and spiritual sobriety, right? Like you're willing to do anything. The higher you get off, it's like you might want to fudge and hedge a little bit, because it's like, it wasn't that bad, you know. Well, maybe not yet, but you're trending in the wrong direction, right? And I know lots of people who had what we call high bottoms. They didn't get a million DUIs or ballooned to 500 pounds or, wrecked their families because of their workaholism. They saw it early and did something about it. And I'm just saying the 12 steps are the thing to do something about it with, right? Because what they do is Joshua, is they get us to address not only the behavior, but the underlying causes and conditions that are underwriting the behavior, right? Like we're not just satisfied in my program with what's amazing to people when they come to a 12-step meeting, right? Whether it's NA or AA or OA or whatever it may be, is all the laughter that's in the room and the fact that we focus on solutions, not problems. And so there's so much hope. I mean, we have our heartfelt, tearful moments, but for the most part, there's this really great sense of joy and peace and hope. And in those rooms, we discover that there is a solution, as Bill Wilson, the author of the 12 Steps, said.
One of the solutions there is to ask God to take away this character defect that we have. And it seems to me, it was like, oh, really? Can we just ask God to take it away?
We turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And then we go about exhuming those problems, those issues in our life, those painful traumas, those places of brokenness, the 1,000 little muggings we experienced growing up that have fueled our addictions or our compulsive behaviors. So there's work involved, and here's the other thing. There's a community involved. When I wrote the book, I strongly recommended to people that they find a community or form a community with whom they can do this work. Because ultimately we get sick alone and we get well together. That's a mantra for me. We get sick alone, we get well together. And in this sort of magic sauce of surrender, of doing our personal work, being in community with others to find support and experience and strength and hope from each other is really, really vital.
For somebody who, I think, finding a community can be difficult for them to open up, to say, hey, I'd love to do this. I mean, I've had times when I've had community, I've said, here, this is my story. I've opened up, I was vulnerable. And what I got back was, I can't believe you're that horrible of a person.
Oh,
And
I'm so sorry.
and so it made me now, after that experience, I was, in my late teens. And so after that experience, I'm like, I don't know if I want to open up to other people to say, here I am, see me. And
Yes.
I'm going to walk through that. So even, in something like that. And so I have a hard time saying, hey, can I open myself up to you or this community? And are you going to be safe enough for me to do that? How can we
Yeah.
find those places to do those things?
So I'm really, really sorry that you had that experience. And I hope it wasn't a 12-step community, but because
No,
I've never had that experience in a 12-step community
it wasn't
ever.
12-step community.
Yeah, I can just tell you, I have never, ever had that experience in a 12-step community. First of all, everybody's there for the same reason. So nobody's judging anybody else. Right? There's sort of a tacit admission at the front end that if you're sitting in here, you're here for the same reason that I'm here, and we're both wrestling with the same demon and having to deal with it together, right? In the context of a community. So in the book, I give a list of all the many, because there's hundreds of 12-step communities. I don't think people realize it's not just AA or NA, it's like there's Overeaters Anonymous, there's Spenders Anonymous, there's Gambling Anonymous, there's, it goes on and on and on, right? All of them use a 12-step format because they've discovered that the 12 steps have this weird kind of unnameable power to change people's lives, right? And I promise you, Joshua, that and again, you share this with me, and I don't presume this is true, but if you have an addictive relationship with food as a way of coping with the pain, trauma, just the basic difficulties of living in the world as a human being, that if you went to a couple, and I always tell people, go to 5 meetings Go to 5 different meetings until you find your group, because they're not all identical, right? Some are better than others, right? Some are boring, some are glum, some are, find one that is filled with joy, hope, and strength. And I guarantee you that you will be received in a way that is non-blaming and not judgmental. And you will actually have an experience of grace and community that you probably, I don't know this, but may never have had in the context of any other religious community.
If community could be like that, I think we would all like run to community like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a friend of mine, Gene, that's not his real name. I talk about him in the book, but he was the pastor of a conservative large church, right? But he was an alcoholic, right? Look at me, I'm laughing about it because this is what happens when you get into recovery, man. You just hear these stories and what makes most people go, oh my gosh, you just go, oh, wow, of course, And he's an alcoholic, right? And he shows up to church one Sunday and he is sozzled, right? He is just potted. And he gets a little bit into his sermon, and the elders or whatever their leadership is, they figure out this guy's looped, and they go and they take him up. But instead of helping him and caring for him and saying, well, of course you're a human being, and you have the capacity for this kind of life that you're living, they fired him, right? Which I find heinous, but that's my own personal opinion. And so they fire him. And then I meet him in the 12-step rooms in the basement of a church one day. And he says to me, it's ironic, isn't it? He said, I have experienced more grace, kindness, charity, and help and transformation in the basement of churches than I ever experienced upstairs in the sanctuary. And he said, I wish those people knew what they were missing. And in many ways, that's what inspired me to write the book. I want those people to learn about what they're missing that's going on in the basement of that church. They're always complaining about alcoholics and drug addicts smoking cigarettes in their parking lot, and have them realize that's not really something you need to get into. It's like there's something going on down there that's bringing people healing and life and transformation in a way that's available to you, even though you don't identify as one of them.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. What's happening in the basement of the church has been more transformative than what's happening in the sanctuary, which is sad. It should both happen. There should be
Yeah, and it
transformation,
can.
and it can, of course. For me, it's really easy, and I think maybe even your story is to pile on knowledge upon knowledge upon knowledge and say, actually, I know the steps. I could walk through them. I know what they are. I have the knowledge about it, and I could talk a good game. Like, hey, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, but it's not actually getting into my soul. I'm not actually really living it, but I could talk about it. How do we move from knowing about something? And I think this is really the secret to, I think, spiritual life and spiritual growth and moving towards God of like knowing about theology or knowing about trauma and recovery and health, and then actually doing it and getting it into yourself and living it out more than just knowing about it.
I think part of the problem, at least this has been my experience, right, is we have a delusional kind of belief that if we were doing it correctly, we would be healed already. You know what I mean? We would be completely healed already. And, I'm 64 years old, and I have a couple of young mentees, and like in their 30s and 40s. And they ask me questions like that. When am I really going to believe that God loves me finally? When am I really going to believe it beyond just what I learned, in seminary or from wherever? And I'm like, it's going to take a minute. It's going to take a minute. And so we continue to work the steps. And I will say that in pretty short order, you will see enough green shoots of growth coming up from the earth in your life that will keep you in the game. But it's going to take a minute, man. Like, like I was reading William Blake the other day, the poet, and he has this great line. He says, we're here to learn how to bear the beams of love.
Hmm.
And I thought to myself, as I'm now in the last quarter of my life, I'm like, if I could reach the end of my life and say that I learned how to love, and even more importantly, how to be loved, then I will have lived a good life. And I think learning how to be loved is harder than learning how to love because there's so much internal resistance to it, you know? It's a longer, more difficult process when we live in an age when everybody wants a hack for the spiritual life to get there faster. And it's just repeatedly showing up and giving God consent, again, to do in us what we could not do for ourselves, which includes allowing ourselves to be loved. And it's not something you're gonna get, I don't think, by the time you're 33 or 4 years old. You know what I mean? Like it's gonna take a minute. It's a long curriculum. And here's the other thing: you must make a decision using that metaphor that you are not gonna simply audit the class, that you're actually gonna take it, right? And so that's like when I first came into the program, my 12-step program that I'm in now, I basically audited the class, and you hear that a lot from people, right? I came in, I didn't get a sponsor. I kind of worked the steps and then I didn't, I kind of halved it. It's like, man, you're really going to have to throw yourself into this in a big way, so that you can find the healing that you want and need in your life. Again, it's not, which in part is also why the gift of desperation is so helpful, right? Because you'll do anything at that point. I will dig as deep as I got to go now because I'm bleeding out, right? But even if you're not, if you're an adult child of an alcoholic or you're codependent or whatever your issue is, right? Like, to reach the point where you're like, I will do whatever it takes to find a relationship with a higher power that will suffuse me with grace and love. And I will tell you that after, all my years of association with 12-step communities, I can tell you that I have arrived at a place in my life where I feel like I have I have the capacity to be loved that I did not have before, and to love.
Then talk to me how centering prayer or something that has helped you bear those beams of love, as William Blake says.
Yeah. Well, that's just one of the things I talk about in the book. And centering prayer is actually a form, and some people would disagree with me on this, but whatever. A form of mindfulness practice. But it is a step more than that. It is a way of turning off your discursive, analytical, chatty mind and actually just saying, here I am, do in me whatever you need to do as I rest in your love, right? There are two words, it's interesting, in the Hebrew scriptures for the word see, right? So one is the physical act of seeing. And then the other word they use is for seeing is behold. I love that word, right? So what does that look like? Like when a mother looks into the face of a newborn infant and her face softens and there's this kind of gaze, and her eyes are locked with the eyes of the infant. She's not seeing that child exclusively. It's more than that. She's beholding the child. And in the beholding, the child sees in the mother's eyes this validating love. Number one, that I exist, that I am real, and two, that I am worthy of love and relationship. And I feel like in centering prayer, what happens is we relax and we gaze into the loving eyes that are gazing back at us, namely the eyes of God. And no words, no, I don't have to have Bon Iver playing in the background. I don't have to have, whatever. It's just me resting. And now it's a difficult practice, which is why it requires what we call practice, to simply rest and quiet the mind and to trust that as we do it, God is, again, I'm going to use that phrase, doing something in us that we could not do for ourselves, right? He's rewiring and remaking us and bringing healing to broken places. And I've experienced that firsthand.
Hey everyone, it's Joshua here. I want to take a quick moment to say thank you for being part of the Shifting Culture community. If you're enjoying the conversations we're having, it would mean the world to me if you would rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening. Your feedback not only helps others discover the show, but also keeps us inspired to bring you these impactful conversations. And if you're looking to dive even deeper, head on over to Substack at shiftingculture.substack.com, where you'll find extra insights, reflections, and more ways to engage with the topics that we explore here. Finally, if you believe in what we're doing and want to support the show, you can make a donation through the Support the Show link in the episode notes. Every contribution helps keep these important conversations alive. Thanks so much for listening and for being part of this journey to embody Jesus and impact the culture around us. So that's good. So I'll do my centering prayer, and then I'll put on Bon Iver, and then I'll be happy. That'll be good. I know that you're the Enneagram guy, and so for me, if I want to be, I'm an Enneagram 3, and so I'm really good at masking up, being a chameleon. I have my masks on, and so for me, it's almost what I was trying to say within the knowledge. I have the knowledge of something, but really I'm just putting on the false mask of doing the work, but I'm not really doing the work. I'm just letting people see that I've done enough so that they can approve of me. What does it look like for somebody? And I know you have a lot of different, if you're a different Enneagram type, some of these things that we need to work on through these steps in your book. And so people could go and look at those. But then what do you see of how do you start to really remove the mask? And even in centering prayer, I think that helps, because that's one of the most vulnerable places I could be, that, God could actually gaze at the real Joshua, that I don't let other people see because of the masks that I wear.
So it's interesting, right? I think actually and I don't do this much in the fix, I do have a little section on it, but every Enneagram type has a compulsivity or addiction, really, right? And so for threes, the addiction is to success, accomplishment, productivity, efficiency, to matching our self-presentation to meet the expectations of others. And the list goes on. These are right. And by the way, have you ever tried to give those things up on your own power?
It
How'd it
doesn't
go?
work. It
No,
doesn't
it
work.
doesn't work, man. Right. So it's like, okay, step one, we admitted we're powerless over the character defects associated with our Enneagram type, and that it's making my life unmanageable. I mean, like, this is how, like, you can plug this stuff in, right? Now, one of the things that I talk about in the fix is this idea that, we have to bring on board an inner observer who can catch us when we begin to fall into unhelpful, unskillful patterns of behavior, and exercise a sacred pause in which we can make different choices. This requires a level of, and by the way, centering prayer will strengthen that muscle in your mind that gives you the ability to step back from present moment experience and observe yourself in a non-blaming, non-judgmental way. And I use that every day, man. Like every single day, I'm always stepping back from my moment to moment experience and saying, "Oh, look at you. Look at what you're doing right now." And I do it in a way that's in the 12 steps have taught me how to do it in a non-judgmental, non-personal way. I don't shame myself. I don't beat myself up. I just step back from my experience and I go, well, look at you. This is what humans do, right? This is just what humans do to deal with their pain. So let's make a different choice, right? And again, I think this is about just good emotional self-leadership. I think this is about good spiritual self-governance. Look at me throwing around all kinds of interesting phrases. But 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 again, it's something you learn, and it's something you practice, and it's something that you get better at and better at as you use tools like centering prayer, spiritual readings, going to meetings and working the steps, speaking to your sponsor. I mean, it's an investment of time and energy, but it's one that's well worth it if you want to see deep transformation in your life, not just surface level. I'm going to mess with the covering. It's like, no, I got to get under the cover and figure out what's really going on in the engine. And I'm just saying the 12 steps offer you that possibility.
So for me, I need to be honest with myself, right? And so that's
Yes.
one of maybe step 4. Step 5 is you're taking an inventory of who you are. What does
Yes.
it look like? I'm being honest with myself. One of the things that really, like, hey, I really like this, is the fear inventory. Where
Yes.
have you been afraid? Can you speak? What is like a fear inventory, and how is that helpful to, like, realistically say this is who you are?
Yeah. So steps 4 and 5 in the 12 steps. 4 is made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And then 5 is admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Now, when you work with a sponsor or you work with a group, you, as part of that, do a number of inventories, right? To, as part of the process. And one is a resentment inventory. Another one is a sexual conduct inventory, and I can explain why that's important later. But the third one is a fear inventory because fear, listen, man, our lives. I remember one time I was in Vermont at our home in Vermont, and I had this realization. And this is many years ago. I had just come back from a 12 step meeting, and I realized, oh my gosh, how much has my life been governed by fear? Just, it's amazing to me. Just how many of my decisions, my thoughts, my feelings, my resting emotional state has been governed by fear or anxiety. And one of the things that we do is we say that resentments are kind of the first line offender for alcoholics, addicts of any kind, right? And because what better, quicker way to deal with anxiety or fear or restlessness, discontent than some kind of chemical or behavioral addiction, right? Like, it's like, I can make that go away in a heartbeat, just give me a donut. You know what I mean? Or give me a new relationship that I think is gonna complete me. Or let me just go people please all afternoon because that way people will make me feel good about myself, and then I won't feel afraid anymore that they're gonna leave me. I mean, these are all addictions, man. It's not just alcohol and drugs. We are seething cauldrons of these things, right? And what's so amazing is when you work the steps, you get an opportunity to learn new ways of regarding these problems, right? And you have new tools to work with these problems. You actually learn to do something amazing, which is, how about just learning to sit in your anxiety and fear with a hopeful heart, with an expectant heart? That, guess what? I could get a phone call in 20 minutes from now and all this is going to go away, right? Instead of doing what I've always done to deal with my pain, which is addictive and unhelpful and unskillful, on and on and on, right? And, but it does require a village. I do believe in the power of community. One of the things I have that's an amazing benefit is if I get into a squirrely place, and by the way, I don't think about drugs and alcohol anymore. It's not like I'm sitting around all day long, holding on by my knuckles going, oh my gosh, that's not how this goes, right? That obsession, by the way, was removed from me in steps 1 through 3. What I also have though is a lot of people on speed dial who call me and who I call from time to time, and I'll say, "Man, I'm not in a good space," and it may be I'm just afraid that this book is gonna be rejected and no one's gonna like me after they read it, right? Or it could be whatever. I mean, I've had that call several times this week, you know? Like, it's just like, I have a community I can go to in my kookiness with all my weird fears and anxieties, and they'll be like, "Okay, well, have you turned it over?" "Yep, I've turned it over." "Okay, well, don't worry, it's gonna be all right." And I go, "Okay," and I believe them, and it is. It turns out to be it's gonna be, it's all right.
Yeah, and I think in the resentments as well is when we hold on to something. I mean, that puts us into a prison that is hard to get out of. And so, part of this is like letting go, forgiveness. How is that helpful within the steps of, and what does forgiveness look like, especially when you're holding on, and how does that help us
Yeah.
as we let go?
So one of the things that's amazing, and I say this not just for alcoholics, again, and drug addicts, but for all of us who are addicts, because all of us are at some level, that how much historical resentments or even present day resentments and anger and unforgiveness govern our lives from the shadow. from the shadows. It could be towards your parents, towards anyone who was supposed to love you better than they did, but they didn't. You know what I mean? And it's like, all of us have experiences where we've been wounded. People can act in horrendous ways towards each other. And doing a resentment inventory is part of, steps 4 and 5. You write down the names of every person, place, institution, situation that towards whom or towards which you have a resentment, which is this feeling of anger and unforgiveness that keeps replaying in the present moment as if that past wrong was continuing to happen right now. You know what I mean? And you know this. You've been at a stoplight and thought about something your mother said when you were in third grade and still getting mad about it. I mean, and we have a lot of those. People are amazed at how many they have when they do an inventory. Like, I'm resentful toward my brother because he didn't care for me when I was a little kid. I was invisible to him. Or I have a resentment toward my ex-wife, or I have a resentment toward my child because their life didn't turn out the way I wanted it to, or, on and on and on. And we have a process in the steps where we work through our resentments and move toward forgiveness and tolerance. And one of the things I love about it, there's a bunch of prayers in the 12 steps, and they're non-denominational. They're not associated with any one, even though the 12 steps derive from a Christian tradition. Bill Wilson made it so that it was accessible to everybody, whether they were Buddhists or Christians or Scientologists or whatever your thing is, right? And we have a process by which we can move from resentment toward understanding and then toward forgiveness. And, forgiveness is about letting go. You know, it's about realizing that person who hurt that you are a sick person, and the person who hurt you also was a sick person. And there's actually a thing called the sick man's prayer in the 12 steps, and it's really quite beautiful. It's like basically saying, this other person is sick, I'm sick, and this is what people do when they're torn up inside. And I can forgive them as I can forgive myself for the mistakes I've made as a result of being a sick person.
Isn't that such a beautiful gift to be able to say, hey, we're all sick? Man, that helps me let go so much, to say, oh, I actually can see them. I can have empathy for the other person. I'm not just thinking about myself and how they're sick as well. And
Yeah.
we can get better together,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Yeah. And like I said, I love the steps because it's like so grace oriented. So like Bill Wilson will say, we are not saints. He says this in the big book, which is like the Bible of my 12-step community. He says, we are not saints. The point is we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. And then he says that we should seek progress, not perfection. When did you hear that in church? Right? I mean, come on, man. Let's just, at the end of the day, we should probably at the back of the church, when people are getting up to leave, the benediction should be, listen, people, progress, not perfection. Right? And, for me, it's like, there are some people on my resentment list. It took longer for my heart to defrost towards them and to warm towards them. But I actually have a couple of practices, like spiritual practices in the book that help people learn to gentle their hearts toward people who've hurt them and let go. That actually I've experienced very powerfully in my life as being that really work. Again, though, it's going to take a minute. Like learning to bear the beams of love is a hard, long, lifelong journey, but you can make progress and you can really enjoy it. Like, I think people think sometimes when you live a life organized around the 12 steps that it must be pretty glum. You know what I mean? Like, oh man, that's a lot of work. And it's like, actually, there's so much joy and there's so much laughter and there's so much growth that it's some days you leave the house and you're so filled with gratitude for what you've been given. And anybody can experience that, whether they identify as an alcoholic or a drug addict or not. It's for everybody.
Amen. That's grace-filled. I love it. It's beautiful. Ian, if you could talk to your readers and tell them what's one hope that you would have for them as they pick up your book and read The Fix?
Well, I hope they're going to find a fix that finally works. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, And it's not going to completely I don't want to say this is a panacea that solves every problem. I mean, my gosh, people would be, there wouldn't be a church basement big enough if we had one that was a complete solution, right? But it's as good a solution as I've found. And I have looked through many solutions. I have looked for it in chemicals. I have looked for it in behaviors. I have looked for it in all manner of addictive patterns in my life. And this is the only one that has helped me to face honestly the truth of my condition, to love myself, to love others, to find freedom from my addictions. And anyone can find freedom from their addictions. Anybody. But follow the rule, follow the directions, and you'll find it. I want people to know that this is available to them, no matter where they are on the addiction continuum from, I'm a soccer mom who is addicted to pleasing people all the way to a meth addict, right? Like, and everybody in between, right? These 12 steps can work for you. And they can begin to get at the underlying causes and conditions of so much of your unhappiness in life.
So, Ian, if you could go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would
Yes.
you give?
Don't pick up that drink. Put down that bourbon. Someone asked me this question at a conference I was speaking at, and so here I am, I'm in front of about 150 people. I'm in a fine mood. I'm feeling really good about myself because I'm obviously a big shot to be up here on the stage being interviewed. You know what I mean? All my ego is just loving this experience, right? And this person said to me, "What would you tell your 21-year-old self?" And something came out of my mouth before I could edit it. You know that experience, and you're like, just comes out, it just spills out of your mouth, and you're like, what did I just say, right? And I said, "You are not what happened to you." And I started to cry on stage. I was really, like, embarrassed, I was like, I mean, I didn't, like, weep, but I was, like, tears running down my face. I said, "If I could tell my 21-year-old self anything, I'd say, you are not what happened to you."
Hmm.
And I say that because, I grew up in a home where my dad was an alcoholic and a drug addict, died from it at younger than me, a year younger than me now. I experienced plenty of stuff in my early years that were very painful, things that I over-identified with. Things happened that I began to use as, I hate to say it at times, but as the victim card. One of the things that the 12 steps has taught me is you are not what happened to you. You actually, it's what, it's like Carl Jung, who's a hero to me. Jung talks about this a lot, this idea that it's what happened to you isn't what really matters. It's who you become that matters. And I love that I'm on a journey now and on a path of becoming. I can't tell you how many years, Joshua, and this is many years ago now, that I spent so much time thinking about the past. I just don't do that very much anymore. I spend a lot of time thinking about the present and the future. I don't shut the door on the past. I don't wish to forget about it. But at the same time, I just focus more on the present and think about the future.
It's so helpful. My spiritual director keeps telling me we're only just becoming.
Yep.
We're only just becoming. And it's really helpful. It's really good.
Mhm.
Anything you've been reading or watching lately you could recommend?
Oh, wow. No one has ever asked me that. Let me think about it. What am I reading lately? So I actually just read Arthur Brooks's book, How to Build the Life You Want. It's not a title that I love because it sounds like, another self-help book. It's actually quite good. It's as well as his book, Strength to Strength, which I liked a lot as well. In terms of things I've been watching, I'll tell you, I do have some guilty pleasures. One is I do love Gary Oldman in Slow Horses.
Oh, he's so good.
Oh my gosh, that guy. I can watch him in any movie. I have a couple of weird actors that I really like that most people don't, most people say, "Oh, Brad Pitt or George." And I'm like, "No, I love Gary Oldman."
Oh, Gary
I
Oldman is
love
incredible.
Oh, man. And it's a great show. And
Yeah.
I liked The Bear, though it was activating at times. I'm kind of always got my nose in, and I did just finish a book on Northern Ireland that I loved called Say Nothing. That is not good bedtime reading because the troubles in Northern Ireland were really troubled. But it's a super well-written, thoughtful book. Anyway, yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for those. How can people go out and get your book, The Fix, And where else would you like to point people to?
Yeah, so the title of the book is The Fix: How the 12 Steps Offer a Surprising Path of Transformation for the Well-Adjusted, the Down and Out, and everyone in between. It's also the longest book title in all of human history. Most of the book is on the cover, and no, there's plenty of good stuff after that. But you can get it at Amazon. You go Barnes and Noble, independent booksellers, anywhere that books are sold. And if they want to learn more about me, they can go to Ian Morgan Cron. That's IANMORGANCRON.com. And all my social handles are at IanMorganCron.com.
Well, Ian, thank you for this conversation. I love this book, The Fix, and I do hope that people will go out and read this and then put these 12 steps into practice to
Yeah.
find their community so that they could bear their stories with other
Mhm.
people, and to take those inventories, to be honest with yourselves, to know that you're powerless over your addiction, and that you can start to walk through these things and give this to God and say, take these character defects and then bring me to a better place, that we could start to do that prayer and then work the steps over time. Because I think, man, after reading your book, it's like, man, I don't know why I haven't found a 12-step program before. This is fantastic. This is really good. So I'm really, really appreciative of this conversation. I loved it. And I really pray that we could all bear those beams of love. So thank you, Ian. It was
You
fantastic.
bet. Thanks, Joshua.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you want to see more episodes like this, go to patreon.com/shiftingculture and become a monthly patron of the show. You can help us produce more episodes so that we can see the body of Christ look more like Jesus. If you become a patron on patreon.com/shiftingculture, you will get early access to episodes. You will get episode guides. You will get bonus shows, hopefully, and more. So go to patreon.com/shiftingculture and become a monthly patron. Also, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us out and helps us find new listeners to the show. And just go and share this podcast with your friends, your family, your network, people that you think would enjoy it as well. Thank you again for listening to the show. I hope you have a great week.